All right, fans, the game is coming up this weekend. And I say it's the game as opposed to the other game because this one's against the Ohio State University. Spencer Holbrook of Letterman Row is joining us to break down the Ohio State Buckeyes. Earlier, I texted him. I said, I'm just going to go with every position's really good for my film analysis. We're going to ask him how far off that is. That's coming up on the BWI Daily Edition. Welcome to the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. You can call me T. Frank. This is Spencer Holbrook. For those that don't know, Letterman Row is the sister site for Blue White Illustrated that covers the Ohio State Buckeyes. He's here joining us to give us the inside scoop on Ohio State and their season so far. Spencer, I know it's a crazy week. Thanks for making time to talk to us about what Ohio State's doing this year.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here. This is one of my favorite weeks of the year. Covering Ohio State, Penn State's always a treat. So it's been a busy week, but a fun week. Let's get into it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of games that have disappointed over the years when it comes to these two teams, especially, in the James Franklin era of playing Ohio State pretty close. Ultimately, though, that's always kind of gone in the Buckeyes' favor. Now, I want to ask you, though, Ohio State got to be pretty worried about this game, right? I mean, the Nittany Lions, offensive juggernaut. They've scored 40-plus points in 6 straight games. They've allowed a grand total of 21 points as a season high, and no. Those are the Ohio State notes. So, but how do the Buckeyes feel coming into this game? And more importantly, how do they feel going into any game where they seem and they have this aura of being bulletproof?
Yeah, I think it's almost a little bit of like a Big Ten Alabama effect without the national titles to show for it. Like, the thing about Ohio State is like it's obviously intimidating to play this team because of the helmet at this point. Like they just win. And so then you talk about the talent level and you flip on the film and you see, what this team can do. And it really can be one of those helmet games where it's just hard to get in the mindset of like, yeah, we're going to win this game if you're an opponent. That being said, if there's one team that knows, what to do to keep this game close and be in it until late in the fourth quarter, it's Penn State. Like, Penn State has traditionally played Ohio State tougher than Michigan has. And, that's even with the Michigan win last year. Like, that's a one-off almost at this point. Whereas Penn State, every single year, they've been very competitive against Ohio State. They were right in it against Urban Meyer. They've been close, not really close, but close against Ryan Day at Ohio State. And so it's just an interesting matchup because you would think Penn State and Michigan would play closer to each other because of the talent level. I think is pretty similar there. But stylistically, when Ohio State and Penn State meet, the two styles clash, and you get some pretty interesting and close games. It's going to be fun to watch this happen on Saturday.
Yeah, this is a conversation at James Franklin's press conference earlier in the week that, Penn State is built to play with Ohio State. They're built with a similar philosophy in mind, a similar architecture. And so the matchup is naturally and intrinsically a little bit better. We'll get into how that might have changed, in my opinion, this year, though. Let's start, though, with CJ Stroud. And, as hard as this is, just like the joke I had to start the show, let's put aside the 2,000 yards and 28 touchdowns. Let's put away the stats for a second. How do you feel he's playing this season outside of the talent around him?
Yeah, I think he's been really, really good. There's been stretches of play where it just seems a little muddled a little bit, maybe a little muddy. The first half against Iowa, when they came out and did a lot more single high than Ohio State expected. You don't really expect to see that from Iowa, but they did that, and it kind of threw Ohio State off its points, trying to move the ball and get the passing game going. And they really couldn't run the ball well against a good Iowa defense. You saw it against Notre Dame when Jackson Smith-Njigba was hurt. They had a game plan surrounding getting the ball to their playmaker, and when he went out, CJ Stroud struggled a little bit. But other than that, I mean, you talk about a guy who's been in command. There was a stretch on Saturday against Iowa once they figured everything out where Stroud was 9 of 9, 170 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's insane. And that's against a good Iowa defense, even though that was when the Iowa defense started to break a little bit. You saw a change in body language. They were obviously frustrated that their offense couldn't get anything going. That's a story for a different time. But, the idea of CJ Stroud is it's not just the touchdowns. It's not just the yards, it's the command, it's the being on his spot, it's the throws that no one else can make. There's a throw to Marvin Harrison Jr. against Michigan State you can point to, a throw to Emeka Egbuka in the win over Iowa that you can point to say nobody else is doing that. Yep. And There have been times this year where I think he has struggled a little bit or gotten a little flustered, but then right after a drive where you think, oh, maybe he's off today, he'll go out, complete every pass on that drive, and then they're in the end zone for 7, and number 7 is celebrating. And wow, that's an NFL guy right there. So it's been an interesting year for CJ, I would say.
Yeah, inconsistency. To just put it out there, like I haven't watched all of the film so far, and the nice thing is they make it easy that you only have to watch one half of a football game. That in mind, it seems like inconsistency is a bit of the conversation here. But then, as you pointed out, the wow throws that he makes up with that. One of them that I saw against Wisconsin, he's throwing into the teeth of a cover 1, and it just layers it over. And I'm sorry, cover 3, just layers it over the linebackers. And it's like most quarterbacks don't make that throw. Most college quarterbacks don't make the throws that he can make. So that doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah.
The growth, I guess the question then is do you see growth from him from one year to the last, now that teams have a year of film on him specifically, and how they might be able to attack him and some of those weaknesses that every player might have? How do you think he's responded to that through the first half of this season?
Yeah, well, one of those weaknesses is the fact that nobody respects him as a runner. And so, there were 2 times against Iowa where he had a first down easily. One of them, he threw an interception. Instead of taking the 10 yards and sliding in for a first down, he threw a ball over the middle that was intercepted. Another one, would have been a first down, and instead he kept it. And I think he was sacked on that play. He's got to be able to run a little bit, and I think teams know that it's not a surprise now. It's not a secret that nobody cares if CJ is going to run or not, because everyone knows he's not going to. So I guess that's a weakness. But the growth I've seen is, last year a lot of it was the ability to trust Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Olave, and Garrett Wilson. None of those 3 have been present with this Ohio State offense this year. Yet CJ Stroud has still been CJ Stroud. So a lot of the credit last year went to the incredible wide receivers Ohio State has with Olave and Wilson and Smith and Jigba. Now that Smith and Jigba,
they're hurting so badly this year.
Yeah, but with for sure, with Smith and Jigba sidelined and Wilson making plays for the Jets and Chris Olave leading NFL receivers right now, for rookies, CJ Stroud had to learn to trust other guys. Now, those other guys, full disclosure, are 5 stars. And that's just how it works at Ohio State. Well, it's the talent around him. Well, of course it's the talent around him. He's at Ohio State. This is it's not anything new. And so I think the trust level that you've seen CJ Stroud establish with Emeka Ibuka, with Marvin Harrison Jr., with a former walk-on like Xavier Johnson to throw him the game-winning touchdown pass against Notre Dame, the trust level that CJ has in his weapons that aren't named Olave and Wilson, and the trust level Ryan Day has given him for this offense, maybe it leads to a couple more turnovers, but maybe it leads to a lot of points and a lot of great play from CJ Stroud.
It's been fascinating to watch some of the things they're able to do. We talk about this when you go to the NFL and you can put really great number 1 receivers in the slot and get certain matchups. Just the way they're able to put Emeka Ibuka in the slot, which, by the way, that was supposed to be Jackson Smith and Jigba, if I'm correct. That's where he played last season, and now you've got a number 1 type receiver against a college safety, and it just that's just unfair. That's a ridiculous situation to create, but that is something that the Ohio State offense is able to do. I want to get to those guys in a little bit, save them for the end of the offensive conversation, because I do think that in a lot of ways, those guys are what make everything go. But what I've seen different this year is the running game. It's been a while since Ohio State has had, I think, a bona fide, seriously dangerous running game. This year seems to be the case for that. Now, again, I haven't sifted through all the film yet, but what I've seen is they Wisconsin at one point. So do you agree with my assessment? And what am I missing, if not, in the situation with the Ohio State running game?
Yeah, it doesn't take too far to go back and see the 2,000 yards that J.K. Dobbins put up in 2019, although that was pre-COVID, and now so it feels like forever ago.
That's a good point.
A 2,000-yard back is almost impossible to do unless you're named Wisconsin, and or unless your name is Barry Sanders. And J.K. Dobbins did that, but that was again pre-COVID. You saw glimpses of a running game, in the Big Ten championship game in 2020, in the Fiesta Bowl against Clemson, or the Sugar Bowl, I'm sorry, in 2020 from Trey Sermon. Last year, you saw the potential of Tre'Veon Henderson in spurts, but the offensive line wasn't near what it should have been because they were playing 4 tackles at guard and tackle. This year, though, Justin Fry, new offensive line coach, associate head coach, he has come in. He's inserted some new running schemes. He's inserted some new ways to run the football and get upfield, run downhill. Last year, I think they ran a little too east and west, not enough north and south. As cliche as that is, it's very true. And now you see a new Miyan Williams who's running like the best back on the roster. But then also you have Tre'Veon Henderson, who is, talent-wise, the best back on the roster. He is on a different level compared to most running backs you'll see nationally. So it's interesting that, the outside observer kind of sees that the Ohio State running game is improved, because I certainly see it, even if they didn't run the ball well against Iowa. I think Iowa is just so fundamentally sound up front that it was hard to find. It's always going to be hard to find lanes against Iowa. Michigan had trouble doing it. Ohio State obviously had trouble doing it. But that's where this offense gets so potent is, if you're going to put an extra safety on the field, or if you even go too high, Wisconsin went too high to not get blown out. And Ohio State said, okay, we're going to run the ball. You bring a safety down once they start running the ball well, and then they're going to throw the ball. It's really difficult. And it all starts, like you said, that's super cliche, but it all starts up front. That offensive line, Paris Johnson, Donovan Jackson, Luke Whippler is a Remington Award, could be winner. Then you go to that other side, and you've got another guy who could be a first round or second round tackle in DeJuan Jones. And Matthew Jones is a 5th-year guy who's played a lot of football. Like, they're just getting things done. And then you mix in the new schemes from Justin Fry, and you're talking about a really dangerous attack there on the ground.
Yeah, Donovan Jackson stood out to me as a run blocker, especially of a guy that we always make the cliche of being able to move people. In the Big Ten, like the talent level is pretty equitable for the most part, that you don't get guys that get pushed 4 or 5 yards off the ball. It takes a special player to be able to do that. He's, at least on film from what I've seen, a guy that can do that. And that, like you talked about, playing 4 tackles last season and now having a better mix up front. Do you think that is part of the conversation, is having a better mix of players up front, that it's not so pass oriented when you've got guys with such length that might be great pass blockers, but you don't have that balance of body type and strength and length and all of those things, with the thought in mind that they're all freak shows, like that almost all of them are great offensive linemen anyway?
Yeah, for sure. And it also goes to the athleticism of this line. Last year, one of the problems that came up was the fact that DeJuan Jones was so good that they moved Thayer Munford to guard to get the best 5 offensive linemen on the field. Well, the best 5 isn't always the best combination of 5. And so you saw them struggle between the tackles because there was no between the tackles, because there were 4 tackles. And so it's just
the A gap is a very small between the tackles.
So, you had a first-time center. You had Thayer Munford, who is now a tackle for the Raiders and made the roster despite being a late draft pick. Maybe he was even undrafted. And so Nicholas Petit-Frere was playing tackle. And you had tackles lining up beside each other. Now you've got a former 5-star, top 15 overall player in the country at guard, which is hard to do as a guard, but Donovan Jackson did that. And he was committed so early that people kind of just dismissed him. But he was a top 15 player in the country at guard. And he has the ability to play tackle, but he's so good at guard, it's hard to move him. He plays between Paris Johnson, who's going to be a first-round pick at tackle, and he plays right beside Luke Whippler, who's one of the best centers in the Big Ten. And so all of that is to say that fundamentally you could see that the line would be better by default just because of the personnel. But then you add in the talent of that personnel. You add in that this is, Paris Johnson's second year as a starter. DeJuan Jones' second year. Luke Whippler's second year. Matthew Jones has spot started for 3 years now. And Donovan Jackson's a freak who's only started 7 games, but his run blocking is off the charts. A little inconsistent at times in pass blocking, but this line can move people. And then again, Justin Fry brought the pulling schemes, the bucks, the GTs, the things that you want to see from a diverse run game from UCLA, where they ran the ball really well last year. He put that a little bit into Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day's offense, and now you're just seeing it start to cook a little bit.
And those pulling schemes were something that Penn State really struggled with against Michigan. One of the reasons they gave up so many yards was, making the linebackers, who some of them are very athletic, some of them are not very athletic, making them run to the sideline. But even when they don't, even when they're running the base system of just the inside outside zone, their athleticism just to me pops off the tape that these guys are what you're looking for when you're trying to run that scheme. They can get those reach blocks, they can control guys, and they can hold the point of attack and allow these big rushing lanes for Miyan Williams and Tre'Veon Henderson. I don't want to gush about them too much because I do want to talk about the reason that they can run just 5 offensive linemen and they don't need a tight end and they can have all of this space is because you lose 2 top 15 picks and you might be as talented this year. And I know Jackson Smith-Njigba has been injured and has been in and out of the lineup. Let's start there with what's the situation with him coming into this week. Do you know anything more today that we didn't know after the game against Iowa?
Yeah, so I have a story right now on LettermanRow.com about Jackson Smith-Njigba. From what we understand at Letterman Row, he was on a pitch count of 20 snaps. He ended up playing 22. He did come up a little bit hobbled in that game on his 22nd snap. He did not play again. He was not on the sideline in the second half. Kind of raised some eyebrows a little bit. He had trainers around him before he left the field for halftime. And then we talked to Ryan Day on Tuesday, and he talked about the pitch count, how they'll know better if he's going to be on a pitch count this week. I would expect a pitch count, but I don't know what that number would be. Maybe it's higher than 20, but I wouldn't expect him to play the full game right as of Wednesday, but that can change. He will play. I think it's pretty certain he will play. He's back in the lineup. How big of an impact can he have, though? I hesitate to answer that right now because we just don't really know. It's a hamstring. So it's how do you feel today compared to yesterday? How are you feeling tomorrow compared to today? It's very day to day with a hamstring when you get to this point in the rehab process. He felt good enough last week to play on Saturday. He played 20 snaps. He had 1 catch, but he had 3 targets. So they tried to get him involved a little bit. I would expect them to try to get him even more involved as long as he feels good this week. But to say he's not going to play, I think would be a false statement. As of Wednesday, like I said, I expect Jackson Smith-Njigba on the field.
So the guys that have been carrying the water then and have been kind of the playmakers so far have been Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. What do you make of that duo in terms of talented duos you've seen at Ohio State over the last couple of seasons?
Man, how much time do you got, man? It is to watch these two, you hesitate because this is an unbiased profession and this is not a biased take at all, but you just have so much fun watching those guys, man. They are so gifted at what they do. Marvin makes those catches where he's got his full arms out and going over a guy to make a crazy catch. Emeka makes one cut and goes. He kind of looks like Jackson Smith-Njigba before Jackson exploded onto the scene. Before Jackson had 300 and some yards in the Rose Bowl, he had 250 yards on, I think, 16 catches against Nebraska. And there was a moment where he made one cut and ran to the end zone. That's what you're seeing from Emeka Egbuka this year.
Yep.
They're exploiting everything that they exploited with Jackson last year. They haven't skipped a beat with Emeka. Now, that might be a little scheme, but also Jackson was a 5-star receiver out of Texas. Emeka was the number 1 receiver in his class.
Yep.
Marvin Harrison Jr., who might be the most talented of all of them because of the work ethic, because of the genes. I'm not sure if his dad
He's pretty good.
Yeah. So he might be the most talented, and he's one of the lowest rated guys that's in the rotation right now as far as recruiting rankings go. So then you also mix in Julian Fleming, who's caught a touchdown in every game he's played this year and had a 79-yard catch and run last week against Iowa. It's about as scary as you could think of trying to defend these guys. Now, I will say, and I'll give some credit here, the Penn State secondary is very good. I like Joey Porter. I like a couple of those other guys in that secondary. It's going to be interesting to see how Penn State tries to match up with these guys because you've got to have talent in your guys. Do you have talent that Joey Porter can go man to man against one of these guys? Well, if you do, and he doesn't, you're going to find out quickly, and you're going to pay the price. But if he can match up with them, then it's going to be a fun game. You've got to be able to get to that point though, and you have to trust him once on an island. And if he gets burned on an island, then you're down 7-0 and you're Ohio State's off and running. So I just think it's interesting, the receivers versus the Penn State cornerbacks, that little chess match of, do you trust them once to go man to man, and can you learn to trust them throughout the game man to man?
On Monday on our live show, this is the exact thing that I pointed to, and I said this is going to be one of the biggest matchups of the game, and it's about what Manny Diaz decides here. Is he going to go press man? Is he going to play a lot of man coverage? Because Joey Porter Jr. is the guy that's going to the league next year, but Kalen King has that talent as well.
Yes, he does.
So
Yeah.
they've got a stable of guys, and Johnny Dixon isn't too far behind that, although he's been a little bit inconsistent. And before this season, before he imploded, Daquan Hardy was one of the best slot corners at the Big Ten at the very least. So they had the horses to go match up with these guys on paper, but it doesn't matter on paper. If it's a camp out, it's a prospect camp out there, you're going one-on-one and you're just playing ball. Sometimes the receiver is going to win. And can you live with that in that sort of scenario? And then beyond that, you're also putting linebackers and safeties in one-on-one. And the depth of talent, if you're putting a Mike linebacker one-on-one with Tre'Veon Henderson, that's a problem too. So
Yes.
that's such a fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up. Because I love that idea of what's the plan going to be coming in, because that's going to, I think, shape a lot of what the Penn State defense and the Ohio State offense look like in this game. Go back to Julian Fleming for 1 second, because it is a sore spot for Penn State fans. The guy that got away, that was almost a Nittany Lion, shows Ohio State from Pennsylvania. What has his career at Ohio State been like? Because it feels like, given the talent in the room, it got off to a slow start. But is he integrating himself, and is he making himself a player for Ohio State?
Absolutely. He's one of the hardest working guys on this roster. He came in, was injured from high school, never got it taken care of in high school because it's high school football. He had a hurt shoulder his entire freshman year. He went through injuries last year. He started this season injured. The first 2 games of the year didn't play. And since then, he's caught a touchdown in every game he's played. So a healthy Julian Fleming is a 5-star number 1 receiver, Julian Fleming, obviously. Because he's got the diversity of the route tree. He's got the ability to break away from defenders and get down the field for an 80-yard touchdown last week. He's got the ability to be one of the best blockers we've seen at Ohio State from the wide receiver position since Chris Olave and since Terry McLaurin, who were elite blockers in the open field. He is very, very special, and I think he's just scratching the surface. I fully think that his freshman year was almost a red shirt, but it wasn't really a red shirt, but it was like a pseudo. You need to get healthy before we trust you on the field. Last year was just unfortunate. He just had a run of bad luck, injuries, and this year, now that he's healthy, he's showing that he deserved every bit of his recruiting ranking, because he's been incredible for Ohio State. Just his ability to stride and run, how long he is, his ability to track the ball, to catch the ball in open space and get upfield. He's very gifted as a route runner, which he had to learn because of the offense his high school ran. It was just, hey, get Julian the ball or run the single wing. Yeah. And then, so now he's learning the route tree from Brian Hartline. He's learning how to make cuts, how to not waste that energy with any false steps. And you're seeing the fruits of that labor come to life when he's catching touchdowns against Big Ten competition this year. He's been a lightning rod for this offense, along with the tight end Cade Stover. Both of them have just been 2 guys that Ohio State has really, really, taken delight in watching grow this year in the passing game.
One last question about the receivers. We spent 23 minutes talking about the offense. It is obviously the headline for this team, but another sneaky, impressive thing is going to be the defense we're going to talk about here in a second. My hot take this year has been that, sure, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson are great. This group that we just ran down, from Fleming all the way up to the guys that are there and at the top of the roster, and then Jackson Smith-Njigba and his breakout season last year. Obviously, the injury kind of changes this, but I think this group is more talented. I think that this is a better overall with size, physicality, and just, overall talent. It might be better than it was last season, and they had 2 top 15 picks, which is, I'm trying to do that thing of not take anything away from the other guys and say, holy cow, look at the talent they have now. Is that pure hot take, or is there something there that you think?
Well, they went 3-man rotation all year last year. Jackson Smith-Njigba was the 3rd guy, and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were the top 2. This year, they're going 4 and even 5 deep. You've got Jackson, who's hurt, but he's coming back. Emeka is the number 1 receiver right now. Then Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming. That's 4 automatically that they trust to put on the field at all times. And then, like I said earlier in this show, Xavier Johnson, a former walk-on, caught the game-winning touchdown against Notre Dame. Like, he's a guy who's more than capable of going out there and playing. You've got some of these young guys in Jaden Ballard, who's starting to see some playing time and is quote, the fastest guy on the team, according to a lot of people in the building, with hands that are still improving and a route
Mhm.
tree that's still improving. So I think this is a deeper unit. I don't know if top end, the first three are as good yet, but I'm not sure that I would say that in November when I've seen a full sample size of Marvin Harrison Jr., who is an absolute freak, of
Yeah.
Emeka Ibuka, who looks like a clone of Jackson Smith and Jigba, from Jackson, who hasn't been healthy, but when he's healthy, we see 1,600 yards,
Yep.
95 catches. Like, I think top to bottom, and then Julian, who I didn't even mention, Julian Fleming again. Like top to bottom, I think 1 to 4, this group is better than last year's group. Just because there were 3 last year, I think there's at least 4 this year that can get it done for you.
Yeah, so no big deal. I mean, everyone
Yeah.
has that, right? Everyone in the NFL, everyone goes 4 deep. Let's talk about the defense because we do need to give them the same respect of, another unit playing really well for the Buckeyes. And let's start at the top. What difference has Jim Knowles made coming in as the defensive coordinator this season?
Everything. It is
Yeah.
night and day. The difference between the lack of diversity in a defensive scheme last year, of thinking that you were good enough to just run your stuff and run it well, and everyone else, and it would be able to salvage you on drives and get the job done, and that just simply wasn't the case. They were embarrassed defensively against Oregon last year. They were embarrassed defensively against Michigan last year, and they really didn't change anything between that other than playing terrible teams, and it disguised the issues that were there. So now Jim Knowles is in. He runs a 4-2-5. It's completely changed everything. The safeties are uh, exponentially better than they were
Mhm.
last year. Lathan
Much
Ransom.
more active, I'd say.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lathan Ransom's one of the best safeties in the country. That's not really a hot take. The numbers don't lie. Tanner McAllister has 3 interceptions because he's so active. He came with Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State, knows the system well enough to disguise himself in the defense and be able to still move to his spot. Then Ronnie Hickman led the Buckeyes in tackles last year. He's really active. He's one of those guys who you can always count on. And up front, Mike Hall's been a surprise. Jack Sawyer roams around and is the jack position, as Jim Knowles calls it.
Yeah.
But they haven't even shown that yet because they haven't had to. And I think you might
Right.
see that against Penn State with Jack Sawyer roaming around, being that rover a little bit. You've got 2 linebackers on the field. You can bring 3 in. The
Yep.
corners disguise every time they cover. It's so different from the basic defense that we saw last year from Ohio State and just trotting out the same defensive scheme on almost every down. The difference is night and day, and it can't be stressed enough how good of a job Jim Knowles has done in turning these guys around.
There's a lot of similarity, I'd say, between what Knowles does, just kind of looking at it from a kind of a broad view of architecture and the types of bodies that they play, to what Manny Diaz does at Penn State. Obviously, the difference being the level of talent, the depth of, I wouldn't say the depth of the safeties. Penn State safeties are very good, but just the overall schematic talent from front to back. And I guess that's where I want to go next before we get back to the secondary is that front 7. Another area I noticed on film is, correct me if I'm wrong, are the linebackers playing better than Ohio State linebackers have played previously? Because they seem like they're keyed in and they're making great plays in the run game, especially.
Yeah, it's not a stretch to say that Tommy Eichenberg should be considered among the best linebackers in the country. I mean,
Yeah.
you've watched some of the film now. This guy is playing out of his mind, and he's leading the team in tackles. He's right up there at the team lead in tackles for loss. He's right up there at the team lead for sacks because they bring these guys aggressively. They're not afraid to pressure you. Steel Chambers is playing really well. Steel Chambers, a former running back who switched over to linebacker and was just thrust into a starting role last year at linebacker, which
Yeah.
tells you where the linebacker position was at this point for Ohio State last year. Now you look at these linebackers who are very, very attacking. They're very confident in what they do. They're given free roam from Jim Knowles to be aggressive, to be creative in what they're doing. And again, it's a credit to Knowles, who's the linebackers coach, along with the defense coordinator, that he's been able to take this unit, which was a liability, especially in the run game last year for Ohio State, and has turned it into one of the biggest strengths. It helps the defensive line because the offensive line doesn't know when those linebackers are coming. It helps the secondary because those linebackers are so diverse in what they do. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, Knowles has done a great job with those guys, but you also have to tip your cap to Tommy Eichenberg, who's just been a lightning rod for this team, and he's one of the most underrated stories right now of this roster.
It's been really impressive to watch because if you're looking for this is always the delicate balance again of saying, where do you attack this team? Because no team is perfect, but also acknowledging that they're good at pretty much every position. And this year, the scheme is benefiting the talent more. And one of the things that you can do, and this is always the gold standard, is if you can deploy the fewest number of resources to one area to then dedicate them somewhere else, now you have a massive advantage on defense. And in Penn State's situation, they may decide they want to go and dedicate the fewest number of resources possible against the passing game so they can help their struggling run defense. And then on the flip side, Ohio State, I feel like they can shut the run down with just those guys, just the front four and those two linebackers. What's the difference in this defensive line? And we keep doing this of comparing to last year, but just in general, what is the strength of that unit in your opinion of that front four?
Well, you have to compare it to last year because last year they didn't meet the standard. The standard
Right.
is Big Ten championship college football playoff. Last year was the one year they didn't do that. So you have to compare it to last year because that's what Ohio State is wanting to do. And so I think it's completely fair to continue to bring up last year's defense compared to this year. Last year, a lot of the same guys. JT Tuimoloau was a true freshman last year. Jack Sawyer was a true freshman last year. Mike Hall, true freshman who redshirted. He didn't even play. Teron Vincent, a guy who wasn't truly healthy. Now healthy, you see him start to deliver. Zach Harrison, who's finally starting to find his footing, find his role as a former five-star who's now in his fourth year in the program. It's just the confidence that they play with, the freeness, is that a word, that they play with. They're just free-flowing. They understand what they're supposed to do, and Jim Knowles kind of takes a lot of the heat if they mess up. He says, if you make a mistake Monday through Thursday, that's on you. If we make a mistake on Saturday, it's on me. And that allows them to play really free, especially up front. You're out of a gap, that's on Jim Knowles. That's not on you. And so this defensive line is playing as confidently as I've seen an Ohio State defensive line. And that includes the one that had Chase Young on it.
Yeah.
Not that there's a player with top end talent of Chase Young, but the confidence level that these guys have that they're going to get the job done with those front four is something that I haven't seen at Ohio State. And then you mix in those linebackers who are just reinforcements behind them playing really well. And you're mixing in a lot of different ideas to get this run defense back to where it should be at Ohio State.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. There's no obvious number one overall pick talent on the defensive line, but just again, going back to the scheme and what you just described, it is obvious on film that these guys are playing with confidence and aggression. And that's half the battle, right? Like that's half the battle of getting guys to play up to the peak of their potential. And if you get guys playing together like that, I think they're averaging 2.9 yards per carry is something I heard the other day from JD Pickell when he was talking about this game on the On3 National show. That's dangerous if that's the baseline for Ohio State's defense up front. And then you throw on all the other stuff on top of that. With Zach Harrison, it's funny the way you phrase that of finally a guy in his fourth year in the program figuring it out. Like if you're a 5-star and you're not gone in 3 years, there's a problem, which is like, it's not the case everywhere else. Like, everyone has their own clock is what we always hear at Penn State. And a guy that's a former 5-star playing, it seems like to kind of dig into that over the last 3 weeks, it seems like it's really come on for him. Is that accurate, or what has been going on if that's not? Because by the stats, it seems like that's where the narrative would be that it's really clicked for him in the last 3 games or so.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of it's to do with Larry Johnson, the defensive line coach, who your fans know him just as well as our fans do. You see the growth in learning the Larry Johnson way, and for Zach Harrison, he's a little different than a lot of guys Larry's worked with. He's 6'4", 6'5". He's got the longest arms of anybody on the roster. His body is just different. He's not as powerful down low. He's more of a use your hands and use your long arms, use your length and get off guys. So I think the path for him under Larry Johnson was a little different than some other guys. But I also think, last year the expectation was your third year guy be Chase Young in his third year, which was, Bednarik Award, which was Heisman finalist. It didn't take with him. And this year he's not a captain anymore. He's just a senior defensive lineman who's also a leader, but not a captain. And he's really taken to the role of just, I'm going to go out there and play. And let's not discount, Thomas, the idea that the defensive tackles can help. the defensive tackles at Ohio State did not play as well as they should have last year for the talent level. When Teron Vincent and Mike Hall are making those plays inside, that guard hesitates to help on Zach Harrison because he has to make sure that he's got, it all taken care of with the guys in the middle who are playing really well right now. And so all of it just comes together for Zach Harrison at the right time. And, you never know if he's going to really get into you and try to get around you to sack the quarterback. You never know if he's going to dip inside. They do some fun things with him because they trust their linebackers to also bring that pressure.
Yeah. And
it's all just freeing him up to be a better thinker on the football field and a better player on the football field. I think he's really starting to excel. And I hate to keep saying this because I'm a broken record. It's a lot of credit to what Jim Knowles is doing. The way that he's just kind of, reinvigorated this defense, found their confidence that they had lost last year when they were being chastised and talked about every week. Are they getting better? Well, this year you don't have to worry about that because you know that they're getting better. You know that you can see it. It's real growth. And that applies to Zach Harrison too. And I think he's just starting to hit his stride. I'm not going to be surprised to see him continue to take off this year.
We're talking to Spencer Holbrook of Letterman Row. We're breaking down the Ohio State Buckeyes in depth, getting you ready for the Buckeyes coming to Happy Valley, playing Penn State noon on Saturday. Not the whiteout. A lot of controversy around that in Happy Valley, but still doesn't diminish how big of a game this is for Penn State and their opportunities in the Big Ten. And obviously for Ohio State, it's a big game because it's the next game on the schedule on their march to a Big Ten East title, which feels inevitable every year at this point. Last couple questions about the defense. Is there anybody that we haven't talked about that you think is a standout player, something Penn State should know about coming into the game that, of the players we haven't discussed?
Yeah, if it's not Lathan Ransom because he kind of jumps out at you from the safety spot, it's definitely JT Tuimoloau. 5-star guy, one of the best players in the country for his class. Chose Ohio State really late in the process last year. Arrived on campus in July. We saw him on the field in September. So he was a guy who immediately came in and they trusted to put on the field despite not having the college weight room, despite not having the build-up that everyone usually needs at least through fall camp. He arrived late even to try to get into fall camp. And so the way that he took this offseason was this is his first ever offseason in the college weight room. You're seeing it show up. He doesn't make the sacks. If you look at the stat sheet, you're going to say, why do I need to care about that guy? He's a quarter second away on every pass rush from making that sack. There's multiple clips of tackles with just handful of jersey trying to stop that guy from getting to the quarterback. And he's on the wrong end of some no calls this year so far. If you watch the film with him, he's just been kind of overshadowed by a Mike Hall, by a Teron Vincent, by even Zach Harrison now. But his impact is far reaching. He's making those plays. He's really, really good against the run. So I think JT Tuimoloau, if you're a guy who likes to watch the film and not just watch the ball, he's a guy that you can dig in on and say, yes, the talent is absolutely there. The production will come eventually because he's just getting better right now by the day.
What number is he so Penn State fans can
can
watch him on?
44, big number 44 there on the edge. He almost looks like a 3-tech, but he's built like a defensive end. But when you get the pads and everything on, you almost could be like, why isn't that guy playing inside? Well, you see with the pass rush moves why he's not playing inside.
The number 44 is not a defensive end number. That's part of it too. I guarantee you that. Yeah. So my casual observation so far has been, if there is a place you want to attack this team, if you can do it, given what we just talked about with the defensive line, can you throw on this team? Because I've noticed a couple of receivers open. The ball doesn't go there for obvious reasons. Is the secondary still kind of learning the scheme and doing more diverse things? Is that been a challenge for them at all? Or is that just kind of noise on film?
No, I think it's a valid reason to say that you could do something on this defense. You obviously have to have time to do it. But if you can throw down the field on the outside, which is a hard thing to do, you can certainly do it, though. Cameron Brown is injured. I'm not sure how much we'll see of him. We'll probably see him on Saturday. He didn't play against Iowa. Denzel Burke has been improving since he sat out a game with an injury. But still, we haven't really seen him the way we did last year as a true freshman All-American and as a guy who was pegged to be, one of the best corners in the country this year. That hasn't materialized very well. And then J.K. Johnson and Jordan Hancock. J.K. has been the third corner all year. He was a kid who they really liked coming out of high school last year. Jordan Hancock, a top 70 overall player who they really liked coming out of high school, flipped from Clemson to Ohio State from Georgia. And then he got hurt in training camp as a guy who was supposed to be one of the breakout stars of this defense, and then got hurt in training camp, a bad hamstring issue, and he's been out until the Iowa game. He just came back on a snap count against Iowa. So is he healthy enough to give you a full game if Cameron Brown can't go, or are they going to continue to rotate corners? If you've got time, if you've got the weapons, you can throw on the outside down the field. The question is, Mitchell Tinsley is kind of similar to Parker Washington, where those guys are more of an inside receiver, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
The safeties are harder to do that on than the corners. And I'm not sure what Penn State has on the very outside to press up against Cameron Brown, to press up against J.K. Johnson and Jordan Hancock and Denzel Burke to make life difficult on those corners. But they are vulnerable right now. That doesn't mean they can't get better. But I'd say if there's one area, like you said, that you could attack the secondary, it's on the outside, on the corners, beyond the hash mark.
Yeah, that's been a constant debate I've had with Penn State fans and some of my colleagues, that I think Mitchell Tinsley has more to give as a receiver, and we've seen it at times. He's a precise route runner, and he can be a contested catch guy, but Sean Clifford has to have the confidence to throw that football up. Last week, he had the confidence to throw that football up, and he was rewarded with it. Against Michigan, not so much in some of those situations where the receivers did not win their individual matchups in some key situations, but that is a big unknown of what those guys can give you. And then Penn State's third receiver has been a whole nother story. That's going to lead into what I want to wrap up the show with. Just a couple more minutes with Spencer Holbrook. We're talking about Penn State, Ohio State, noon. You can catch the BWI Live postgame show directly after the game. We will dissect it, whether it is a three-car pileup or if it's a race car event where we're going up and down the field. Doesn't matter how this game plays out. We're going to talk about it live at the conclusion of Penn State and Ohio State. Just put that on your calendar. What do you think of Penn State? What do you think of the Penn State offense? Explosive at times, but incredibly inconsistent. Do you feel like you know what to expect from the Nittany Lions coming into this game?
It's a mixed bag, and it's because of Sean Clifford. From what I see, Ohio State fans know this Penn State team because they were off. Ohio State was off the week Penn State played Michigan. That's terrible news for Penn State because now Ohio State fans think that Ohio State should do exactly what Michigan did. But this is a favorable matchup for Penn State compared to Michigan. I'm not saying that this is truly like Penn State has the edge here, but you talk about Ohio State versus Penn State, it's a different kind of matchup than Michigan versus Penn State. And so I do think Penn State can have some success. I don't know if Penn State can run the ball. Maybe break one, but it's going to be very, very tough sledding. You're talking about 1 to 2.5 yards a carry, and then it could go up to 3 to 3.5 on one run, a 65-yard run. But other than that, I think you're going to just try to chip away and really run the ball just to say that you did it. This run defense is really good, and I'm not sure if Penn State's offensive line has really the horses, and that maybe that sounds a little scarlet-colored glasses, but I see this Ohio State run defense just continue to get better. Yeah. And I see the Penn State run offense struggle. And then also, if you're going to score points against Ohio State, you've got to keep up against Ohio State. I think Ohio State will be able to score points because of the Ohio State run game. If you try to devote anything to the run game, you're going to be susceptible to the pass because of the tight end passing game with Cade Stover, which we didn't even talk about, but he has a catch in every game. Yep. The corners, I think Penn State's corners are good. How good? Marvin Harrison Jr. has 6 touchdowns against press man coverage this year. You're going to have to be able to press man him, or you're going to get the ball run on you. And Ohio State's not afraid to do that. So I think this Penn State team is good. I think I picked this Penn State team. If I check back on my notes to finish 9-3, I would probably say 10-2 at this point. I don't see another reason to think that they're going to drop another game other than Ohio State. But I see the talent there. I know the talent is there. I just don't know how long that talent can keep up. And James Franklin talks about this all the time. Whether it's the elite team comment or just keeping up and becoming one of the top tiers of college football. You can do it. And Iowa even did it a little bit because of confusion. You can do it for 35 minutes. You can do it for 40 minutes. Notre Dame did it for 45 minutes. And on the 45th minute, Ohio State threw a touchdown pass over the top because Notre Dame made one little mistake in bringing a safety. It led single high. You get a touchdown pass, and then Ohio State leans on you and runs the clock out. So can you do it for 60 minutes? Penn State teams in the past did it for 60 minutes and lost by 1 with Trace McSorley, with Saquon Barkley, with ridiculously talented players like Micah Parsons. Are those guys there this year? Can Sean Clifford keep up with Ohio State for 60 minutes? I just don't. I can't bring myself to think that way. So I'll be surprised if it happens, but I'm not going to say that Ohio State's going to walk in there and win by 30.
Yeah, that's kind of somebody asked me my hot take or my bold prediction this game is that Penn State's going to. I think Ohio State can cover the spread, but Penn State's not going to get blown out. Like they're going to be in the game, but they might lose by 14 late, which doesn't make you feel any better. I just want to go back to something you said. You, somebody who covers Ohio State and sees what the top end of college football looks like, you think Penn State is a good team. So where do you think they rank among the teams that Ohio State has played so far? And how do you handle the schedule conversation, which is going to lead into a whole nother a quick conversation that I want to have about that once you're done with your response?
Yeah, I think Penn State is, right now with this Penn State team, I don't want to say Sean Clifford holds this team back because I'm not sure Drew Allar is as ready as maybe Penn State fans want to believe he is. Just because he's a true freshman. It is hard to play as a true freshman as a quarterback. There are just a few select guys who make it look easy. Trevor Lawrence kind of ruined it for everyone, looking that good as a freshman. And so everyone thinks 5 stars can go in as true freshmen and be that. And I'm just not sure. But I think with Sean Clifford, with freshman running backs, with a susceptible run defense, I think this Penn State team is probably a top 20 team in the country. On a neutral field, I think they would beat a lot of really good teams. Are they pushing the top edge of that elite to very good status that I think Michigan's in, that I think an Oklahoma State's in, that I think, a few other teams around the country, maybe a USC because they can outscore a lot of people who are trying to push into that upper tier and join the club. And that sounds really exclusionist, and I don't mean it to be, but that's just the way college football is right now.
Yep.
It's a 3-man club, maybe 4. I still am a little skeptical about whether Tennessee can handle Georgia, just because of athleticism there. But Penn State, Tennessee, Penn State, Michigan. We saw that, but that was at Michigan. Penn State, Oklahoma State, even a Penn State, TCU. How do those games end? I think they're competitive, and I think Penn State probably wins a lot of them. But top 15, top 20, that's a damn good football program. But Penn State wants more, and so that's how I view Penn State right now. Is just I know that they can do it at a very high level. Can they do it at the highest level? Right now, I say no.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair way to position that. Also, this season internally from Penn State football fans is a very different conversation than where it was at the beginning of the season, where everyone coming off the last 2 seasons expected Penn State to be 8-4 or 7-6 because of kind of the doomsday mentality of all this stuff. But here they are 6-1 going into another meaningful game. This team is also, in my estimation, a year ahead, kind of like in 2019, where they've got some really young players playing ahead of their schedule. So if you want to go the trajectory conversation, maybe they took a step back, but they are going in that direction. They are not backsliding continually from where they were in 2019. That's aside the point, but I want to ask you one last thing. Do we discredit games just because of the final score? And this is kind of my point of Ohio State has blown everybody out, right? And maybe they don't have the strongest strength of schedule so far this season, but they made Wisconsin look really bad. And Wisconsin is not a bad team. So just generally in college football, it seems to be that when you beat somebody and you beat them soundly, it's like, oh, well, that team wasn't any good. And we keep moving the goalposts. For Ohio State, the goalpost has never moved because it's all the way at the end of where it's supposed to be. And I don't know if this is a fair comment for you, given what you observe on a regular basis, but what is your opinion of that? Just how we view teams when you beat them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I look at Georgia, who struggled with Kent State, who struggled with Missouri. And every time after those games, it's should we worry about Georgia? And people are nah, don't worry about Georgia. They're fine. I look at Alabama. You talk about the Texas game, who's an average Texas team, in my opinion, with a decent quarterback, a freshman quarterback still. You look at Texas A&M, who sucks. Texas A&M is bad.
Yeah.
That's a bad football team. Alabama was 1 play and 1 yard away from losing to that team at home. No, I think it was on the road. No matter what, though. Then you look at Alabama against Tennessee. They couldn't stop anybody. And we still say, well, that team can still make the college football playoff. But if Ohio State had been within 1 yard of losing to Michigan State, a 3-4 Michigan State team who has almost the same record, I think, and similar statistics offensively to Texas A&M, and they were a field goal with 13 seconds to go away from losing to a team of Texas caliber, let's call it Wisconsin.
Yeah.
We would have completely different conversations about whether Ohio State could reach what Alabama and Georgia are. And so obviously there's some Southeastern, we're Big Ten guys. Like, we're going to say it like, oh, there's SEC bias, but like,
right.
Look at the way people talk about the three teams that everybody thinks are the best in college football. The conversations are completely different surrounding Ohio State. Well, they haven't played anybody. Well, every team they've played that they were supposed to decimate, they've decimated. Georgia should have beaten Missouri badly. Georgia should have been up 48-0 at the end of the first half against Kent State, and the third-string walk-on should have been in the game in the third quarter. They didn't do that. If Ohio State struggled with Toledo the way Georgia struggled with Kent State, this would not be a conversation we'd be having right now. And so it is frustrating to see this team with this level of talent be in the Big Ten. And it would be frustrating for me if it was Penn State. It's not just because of Ohio State, but like the curve that folks grade Ohio State on is so great that it is very hard to get a real feel for what this team and what this program is. Because, when they struggle with a Penn State, then we ask, well, is this a better thing for Penn State, or does this show some cracks in Ohio State? Whereas if, Alabama struggles with, a top 20 LSU team, we say, oh, that's a great game between two great teams, and it cements Alabama number one. You know what I'm saying? Like, the conversation just completely changes based on what the color of the jersey looks like. And so Ohio State has taken complete care of business this year. It struggled against Notre Dame, but that's because Jackson Smith and Jigba wasn't on the field, and offensively they looked like a wreck for 3/4 of football. But other than that, there has been no point in this season where I've sat in a press box and been like, man, I don't know really how good this team is. They're killing people. And I expect Penn State to give them a good game. And I think it's going to be a good measuring stick for where Ohio State is, not just where Penn State is. But sometimes it is kind of interesting to see the conversation surrounding the elite of the elite programs in college football.
Yeah, and you take a step down, and it's, sure, Penn State can win 10 games. A lot of fans are already accounting for this season as a 10-2 season, and it's not good enough because you lost to the only two good teams on your schedule, which I think is just ridiculous, because just because you're not the elite of the elite doesn't mean you aren't a good football team. And Penn State so far has proven they're a good football team, but as we pointed out, talking about Ohio State and Penn State in this matchup, maybe they aren't as complete as one of the best teams to come through college football in just a hot minute. So Spencer Holbrook, I know you got a very busy day. Thank you for giving us a little bit extra time even to discuss this breakdown. I thoroughly enjoyed this. We got to do this again.
Absolutely, man. I'm available anytime. If you want to talk about it after the game, let's set up a time we can do it. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you having me.
We'll be back tomorrow with the official preview with Sean Fitz and Nate Bauer on the BWI Daily Edition. Then we'll be back on Friday with your best bets and your recruiting preview with another huge game for Penn State football with talent that will decide the future. Coming to watch Ohio State. Well, that's all this week on the BWI Daily Edition. We'll talk to you then.